Well, there's Scott Spann here from my sailboat office in Sausalito, California. This is the next video in a series. I guess this is the third one. I did an overview, then one about mapping, and then one about team alignment and behavioral time graphs and how to use that tool. This is about how I've been doing strategy offsites to help a team develop a strategy, typically a team that's never fully met together, whether it's at the organizational level or the level of a network, bringing people together that typically haven't worked together to come out the back end with a really solid strategy, one they all feel confident they can execute on, one they feel that will achieve their goal, which is usually a pretty ambitious goal if you saw the last video. Yeah. So, by the way, I'm not going to go back to that first video, which sets the context for all this, talks about me and my work with, as a leader, as a trauma psychotherapist, developmental psychotherapist in business. And the different things about me, just know that I've kind of been around the block about a lot of that. And I'm not going to talk more specifically about how we got into the situation that we're in a complex adaptive world primarily, that we're in a multi-stakeholder and interdependent world. That's in that first video. I am going to focus here on the 7 steps to this system strategy on the path to effortless leadership. And everybody who's watched any of these knows I'm going to repeat this effortless leadership thing because sometimes it sounds pie in the sky or idealistic, and I consider it to be an imperative that if we're working with what it means to be human and we're working with what it means to be engaged in or functioning in complex systems, then it should be effortless. If it's not, if we're struggling, something's out of alignment. And I'd say what's out of alignment is we're working against what it means to be human and we're working against what it means to be in a complex system. And those things are knowable, and we can create the initial conditions and the rule sets to navigate those things relatively effortlessly. And that's what this work in this series is about. Now, what I'm going to share with you is a 2-day process. And it typically takes me a couple of days to walk people through exactly how to do this at the level that I feel confident that they can then go replicate it. I've made a promise to get people through these things in 10 to 20 minutes. I've been more on the 20-minute into things than the 10-minute into things. Some people want me to talk slower. Some people might make the videos shorter. I haven't been able to figure out how to do both things simultaneously, so I'm just going to be me. If this is too fast for you, you can go to the YouTube settings and slow me down. And if I'm too slow, you can go to the YouTube settings and speed me up. And my apologies in advance if I'm disappointing you there. But do give me feedback about whether this is working for you or not working for you. I want to show you where we are in that first video. I talked about the structure of emergent impact. I'm not going to repeat that here. I'm just going to say we're at the organization or network level, and that we're going to work on at the whole group level here, and that we're working on the strategy part. I'm assuming the integrated map has already been done. The analysis has already been done. I haven't done videos on that yet. That's part of a deeper dive on stuff that takes more than 10 or 20 minutes. We're going to look primarily here about the structure of creating a strategy. And I think that's all I need to say right now before we jump into it. So I'm just going to go ahead and get with this. And if you want a copy of the PowerPoint that I use in this, and there are some additional notes that go with this, feel free to email me. My email address will be at the end of the video. And I'll happily send it to you. I really want, we've got to figure out how to solve these kinds of things, and I want you out there doing as much of it that you can do on your own as you can. So I'm going to build off of a real world project as I do in all of these. By the way, I've done similar things with Apple, with HP, with Humana, with InSource Energy, with the White House, with the US Navy, with Lockheed. But I've had to sign NDAs in those cases. So most of the projects that I share with you are from work that I've done in the public sector, work that's already publicly available, usually with NGOs. So that's where I can share here. So the 7 steps that I'm talking about here, how do we move from the strategic explorations we did with the map and the analysis into alignment and action? And so the first thing we have to do is to define the measurable time-specific goal, the levers in the strategy map. I'll show you an example of that in a minute. We have to deconstruct and then reconstruct our state of being or our mindset as we step into this, because many of us bring our in-the-box minds to it. So I'm going to talk a bit about that. We need to discover our emergent strategies, and I do mean discover, and I do mean emergent. If you saw the little bit I did on the first video about complex adaptive systems, or if you've seen the fuller video I've done on the complexity mindset, you'll know that the solutions in that space of a complex adaptive world as opposed to a simple, a complicated, or a chaotic are emergent, and the organizational structure that works best is definitely collaboration, and that typically takes the form of self-organizing networks. Once we've got those emergent strategies up, then we need to deliberate among those strategies to decide what's our optimal strategic approach, design the 5 to 7 key phases, the roles, and the rough timing associated with that. Then we need to do due diligence with the other people in the room who represent other parts of the system to see, do we have have we covered the bases with this strategy? And then we need to declare what is our one next step going to be. And I'm really big on this one next step, which has to do with emergence, by the way, and some other things that we talk about, like safe to fail probes in complex adaptive systems and stuff. But just getting clear about one next step, because when we take that one next step, the world is going to change. And then we need to be prepared to adapt to that change in a complex adaptive system, and then take another step and another step. And it doesn't mean we don't have some rough idea what those are, but we can't be too wedded to like a 1, 3, a 5-year plan. That's hard to do in today's world. So when I say define the measurable time-specific goal, the levers, and the strategy map, we need to be able to have an authentic conversation about that. Now, we've been setting that up when we did the individual maps and when we did the integrated map and when we did the subgroup meetings and the behavioral time graphs. We've been working our way toward this. But now we're prepared to have an authentic conversation about our goal and about our levers and the strategy map. So in this case, with this group on restoring Lake Champlain, they came up with this goal, the top part of which is probably the most salient, is by 2018, every citizen, agricultural producer, property owner, and government official accepts and acknowledges that we have a problem and is taking individual and collective action that will result in a significant factual improvement by 2020. So that's measurable and time specific. And just briefly, the way we got to this goal was through having each subgroup come up with a goal and then taking those goals and sending them out and having the group vote on those goals through a survey process, and then bringing those survey results into this 2-day offsite and having a conversation about, okay, what is our real goal now? And there's a way to get into that in much more detail and to do it where you can come out assured that you will get a good goal. Too much to go into right now, but just know that that's roughly how we got to that goal. So however you get to a goal, if you have your own process, do that. But the goal's got to be clear. It's got to be measurable. It's got to be time specific, and it's got to be positive. It can't be like stop pollution or the against world. We need to be for something, not just simply against something. We can be against something, but in the context of what we're for. There's a lot more on that, but we won't go into it now. Now, when I say define our levers in our strategy map, I'm not going to read through this whole thing, but in the center of this map is the goal associated with that, and then surrounding it. And if you want to stop this and look at it, or if you want to, email me about the printout of this, there is a specific set of levers that came out of an analysis we did. I'm not going to go into analysis right now, but we look at archetypes, we look at how resources are trending, we run it through a piece of software that's used by the intelligence services to identify nodes of opportunity and networks of great uncertainty. We have individuals in the system, experts weight the different aspects of the system, things like that. And out of that, we extract the typically 5 to 7 levers in the system. It just always seems like it's just 5 to 7 things. Out of that bigger map that we had, which was a big map, we define the levers, and then we sequence those levers, and because there's a sequence to it. Certain things have to happen before other things can happen, and that sequence is important. And that's important for coordinating action across the whole network or organization. And so we come up with that strategy map, and then we ask people to self-select to those different levers. Which lever do you want to work on? Which part of the map do you want to go work on? Now then, once they're moving into those teams, we then go through an exercise and we say, if this is what we're trying to solve for, if this is the goal we're trying to achieve, if this is the gap we saw in each of our behavior over time graphs, then we're going to, how do we be the, I don't say be the change we want to see in the world, but I do say, what's the state of being that we need to inhabit in order to solve for this, and have people make a declaration. Now, once they make that declaration, it's typically a one-word declaration. We put them into an exercise, and invariably, the exercises we put people into are exercises where they actually don't do any of those things they said they have to do in order to be successful. And the intent is not to make them wrong or to shame them. In fact, it can't be shaming. That's a disservice to the group. What it is to demonstrate to us all that we all have ways of operating that don't serve us. So there's one exercise that you can do, the red-black exercise. I'm not going to click on this right now for time reasons, but if you order this, you can click on this PowerPoint and it'll take you right to it. You can Google red-black exercise on the web and you'll see instructions for that. You can Google the maze exercise and you'll see instructions for that. But put people through some kind of an exercise. If you have your own, that's great. But put them through some sort of exercise where they have to be able to collaborate and they have the opportunity to take personal and collective responsibility for the outcome. But where they have a chance to see how they behave when they're under pressure, trying to accomplish something, trying to perform at a high level, and then debrief that and then have people adjust around that. Now that puts them stepping into teams in a much more aware, much more, I want to say, awakened, and a much more humble sort of state of being, much better prepared to work together. Then we want to discover our emergent strategies. Now, if you remember from, if you saw that longer video on complexity mindset, or even when I touched on complexity in that first video, we're looking for what are called safe to fail probes. That is, in a complex adaptive system, we're not really sure how that system is going to respond to the actions we take, because the actors in the system are co-evolving. So we're going to make a move in the system, and then we're going to see how that system responds to us. But it needs to be a safe to fail probe. That is, it's a probe that if it fails, it will not blow up the system. So I have each person in each leverage team come up with 3 to 5 ideas. And I talked in the last video about why it's important for each person to generate their own ideas. I want them to come up with one that risks failure, because if we're not risking failure when we come up with one of these ideas, then we're not getting out of the box. So at least one of those ideas has to be crazy or zany or loony, not stupid, but outside the bounds of normalcy. Still a good idea, but it could bomb. Because then we know you're truly probing. You share those strategies without comment in your group. Don't debate them. Don't justify them. Just share them. Once all that information's out there, then we step into a cross-pollination where we have everybody in the room get out of their teams and cross-pollinate, and I'll do a separate video on that, but basically they are randomly generated conversations. They're not going and talking to their best friend, and we're not just saying go pick somebody you don't know, because that rarely ever actually works very well. We literally randomly assign people to cross-pollinate in the room, and this is based on Stuart Kaufman's work around how you optimize information flow in a network, and it's been mathematically proven that more of the information will show up in the right time at the right place if you randomly distribute information across the network than if you try to hierarchically disseminate it by calling an all-company meeting or having everybody get up and share with everybody else. That takes the network to gridlock. So we cross-pollinate them. Then they come back into their teams. After they've cross-pollinated, they have all these ideas, they know what other teams are thinking, then they pick one of their many strategies that they want to work on. Okay? Now they've got one. So now they move into prototyping. They're doing the due diligence across the system, but the first thing they got to do is they got to prototype the thing. So they're going to set a measurable time-specific goal for their strategy inside of the larger goal of their, for that lever and for that strategy. Then they're going to decide who are the stakeholders, and then what are the phases that we need to engage in, the rough phases of work, and then what are the different roles, that is, the assets required to get the job done. Now, once they flesh that thing out, they're going to do a process called ritual descent. You can Google this as well. I traded with a guy named Dave Snowden, I mentioned in an earlier video about complexity and the complexity mindset. And they developed a process called ritual descent, in which an individual from one team stays at their table, people from all the other teams come to that table, and the ones that were at that table go to each of the other tables. So you've got, at every table, one person from every team. The person presenting takes 5 minutes to simply present their strategy, the goal, the stakeholders, the phases, the roles. They've got 5 minutes to say that without any exchange, just say that. They turn their chair around, and the rest of the room, the rest of the table has at it. So members from each of the other teams, I love this. What are they thinking here? They've completely forgotten about this. And they just have at that strategy while the person that presented it with their back turned, literally, seriously, back turned, so there's no facial cues or anything like that, taking copious notes. At the end of 10 or 15 minutes, the presenter, the facilitator calls stop. The presenter turns around and says, thank you. The teams reconverge. And then the presenter shares out what they learned from everybody else. Now, this has accomplished two things: really good feedback on your strategy with input from the people that are in the system with you, depending upon what you're doing. And you've shared information back out to all the other teams about what each of the other strategies looks like. It's a really great way to disseminate information. Now, you revise your strategy based on that, and then you go into declaring what your next steps are. And there are kind of two phases to this, maybe three if you want to count it. But what I do here, I'm trying to keep this again within the 10 to 20 minute time range, so forgive me for being too brief here. Again, we could spend 2 days on this easily. We go into what's either called a Racy chart or a Darcy chart, depending on whether you want to have a decider or you're not going to have a decider in the room. But you want to get down to what are the steps we're going to take, the strategic next steps we're going to take most immediately, and you put those on the left-hand side, and then across the top are who's going to do them or the role. And so the role that if you don't know who it's going to be, it could be a role like a graphic designer. It could be a role like a researcher. It could be a role like a communications expert. It could be those different kinds of roles if you don't have names in there. But get the tasks and the roles defined, and then fill them in terms of who's to be responsible, accountable, who's to be consulted and informed. Because what we're trying to get people to in this 2-day process is typically, if it's in an organization, then we know they're going to move forward. If it's an affiliation of networks or other organizations trying this out, they need to get a sense of what it tastes like, feels like, smells like, looks like, before they're willing to commit to that other one next step, which is to agree to just one next step, which is to come back together and plan just the next 90 days of work. Because one of the things we found in working in this way is that we want to engage in low amplitude. By that I mean not very big, but very high frequency cycles of work, which is the way that nature and reality work. They're not these 5 or 10 or 15-year processes. Typically, with these high amplitude things, we need to be in much quicker relationship with reality, so we're adjusting much more quickly because we don't know how these systems are going to respond. So we want them in 90-day cycles of work, and this has proven incredibly effective. And there are stories I can tell about that, but I won't do that. I'll just save that for just a whole other video. So what we ask people to do is, first of all, fill this out. Having gone through this process, we do formally ask them to stand up and declare, scale of 1 to 10, what's your level of confidence that if we engage in this strategy the way that we've described it, that we're able to be successful. And some people will say 8 and 9, and some people will say 2 and 3, and we love the 2s and 3s because when they say 2 or 3, we ask the question, what would move your number from a 2 or 3 to an 8, 9, or 10? And when they give us that information, we work that until we know we're solid at an 8, 9, or 10 with them, because the information they're giving us is valuable input about other things we may have forgotten. They might have said, oh, you've forgotten about the regulators, or what about the governor, or whatever the different pieces are that they're coming up with. But we want to make note of those, we want to keep a log of those, and we want to work those as well as the other things we said we need to work. Then we say, are you willing to come to the next step? And I have never had a group, if we work it this way, not choose to go to a 90-day process. Never. I think it's always been, if not unanimous, nearly unanimous. Okay, so this is then they're declaring that one next step of we're going to go to the 90 days. So that was just remind me to say that if I hadn't said it by now. So I'm going to stop here. I'm probably close or beyond my 10 to 20 minutes. I hope not. Again, if you want a copy of this, email me. If you're listening to this anywhere other than scottspann.com, I'd ask you to head over there, leave me a comment, let me know, give me a like. If you didn't like it, give me an unlike, but let me know what you didn't like. If you found it valuable, I'd ask you to subscribe. I really am trying to give you brief, valuable bits of information about how to work in a way that I have seen produce a 3-fold increase in organizational capability, and team capability and individual capability. And if you feel like it's valuable and you want to share it, then please share it. Any of those things would really help spread this work, because we've simply got to spread it. If you look at that first video, there's a gap there of the rate of emergence of these kinds of problems and our ability to solve them, which at best looks like this. Some say it makes things worse. And we're trying to close this gap by getting this way of working out there. So I'm going to stop. Thanks so much for listening. And regardless of where you are, I hope this finds you thriving today. Take good care. Bye-bye.